Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're welcoming back Brendan McCaskell, a fellow Canadian, game designer, and producer at OOMM Games. His most recent title, Mythwind, is absolutely exploding on Kickstarter. Brendan, welcome to the binge. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me here, James. Doing well.
It is awesome having you back. For those who don't know, quick little housekeeping. Episode 9. You were like, this is episode 124. And
Whoa, that big, eh? Great.
Yeah, 124, and you were here for episode 9 right at the beginning, so on the initial 10. So I do appreciate you joining us back then when we talked about Stars of Akarios, which absolutely crushed it on Kickstarter. I know you guys did over $1 million in total funding, but on Kickstarter alone, you guys hit, I think it was about 920,000. So it was very generous of you at the time to jump on our wee little podcast at the time. So it's awesome to have you come back when we've got a much larger audience and chat about some of your new projects. So for those who maybe didn't go back to our back catalog and listen to prior episodes, can you just give people an overview of kind of your background, how you're kind of connected into OOMM Games, what that's all about?
Yeah, great question. So a while back, this is kind of a relatively new full-time gig for me, just for the past 2 years. But a while back, I was, working a different job, and I always enjoyed board games and stuff. And I loved Kickstarter, and I was like, hey, it'd be cool to put a board game on Kickstarter like everyone else was doing. So I made this little game called Last One Standing. Not like it's an okay game. It's just not my favorite game. But it's basically kind of like it was like a Fortnite knockoff, kind of first to market in the board game realm. And we funded and raised like $28,000 or something like that, which is pretty neat.
That's not bad, yeah.
And then, for kind of first campaign, doing everything myself except the art. It was a real shoestring budget. And delivered that, which was fun. And I actually got connected with a local guy in town who was starting up a board game company, and just kind of had this invitation if I wanted to make games to talk to him. And I took him up on that offer a little bit, a year or 2 years later, and got to make Stars of Akarios, which was, fun, and finishing up mass production right now. And so really excited for people to get their hands on that. It's just a massive box of sci-fi goodness. And then now Mythwind's on Kickstarter, so it's been a wild ride.
And with your role, so you at OOMM Games, you do game design, but you're also listed as kind of like a producer. So is it kind of in the development side as well that you get kind of involved in that, or how's that work?
Yeah. So we're kind of figuring it out where I'm realizing my my superpowers, whatever, the things that I excel at, are kind of where idea meets community. And so there's this, I love kind of thinking of what I would like to play. And it just so happens that the games that I would be interested in playing myself that I can't find are games that other people are interested in playing themselves, but also can't find. And then so that's where I kind of see my strong point. And game design, game mechanics, I can do a lot of that, but I've been learning that, hey, sometimes it's better to ask for help. And so even with Stars of Akarios, for the people who were there during the campaign, I think 7 or 8,000 total backers at the end of the day. They saw kind of this massive iteration from the beginning to the end, on a lot of different things. Like our team kind of grew. We got we got writers, and then we brought in a really key play tester who did a lot of hard work, and then our whole community was play testing. So there's like this massive iteration of the game that's like, and the finished product is like so much better than what it was, and that was because of more people involved. And so that's kind of what I'm learning. And so kind of all my projects going forward, I don't think I'll ever be listed as a solo developer again, or designer again. But
I used to have a boss that would say to me, none of us are as smart as all of us.
Yeah, it's great.
And I take that to heart because it's so true, right? Like you don't have to do it alone. Like there's so many people in this industry that are dying to get involved, right? Just give me like a little a crumb. Give me something that I can get involved in the industry, right? So, certainly for, game designers or even developers out there, they shouldn't be afraid to kind of reach out to the community, because there's a lot of resources, a lot of help. There are a lot of smart people out there, a lot of people that have
A lot
played
of smart people.
way more games than you could have possibly have played in your
Yeah.
life, that can be better informed on how certain mechanics and things like that might work and how it might actually play on a table. So definitely
Yeah.
a resource you want to take advantage of. So in this role at Games, where you've been working on these games, which are these kind of big, chunky projects, right? Like Stars of Akarios,
Hmm.
chunky game, right?
Yeah.
Mythwind, which we'll get into in a couple minutes here, is I've heard it explained as it's not too complex that you can't jump in fast, but it's narrative driven, right? So there's a huge world there. And so
Yeah.
how do you approach these kind of projects when, they're not quick development cycles, right? This is something that I imagine takes quite an amount of time to develop. So how do you approach that? And is it only one project at a time, or are you working on kind of several at the same time, or what's your
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. So that's, it's an interesting thing, because the games that I'm inclined to, create are games that, I want to experience, and I want to experience a like an experience, not just like a session. And so, it ends up being this big project. We're like, well, when is it ever going to be just a 90-minute game that starts and finishes? And I don't know honestly, I don't know if I'll ever kind of make a game like that, because one, I don't think I'm smart enough to have a tight Euro. That's just not the type of game that I'm interested in playing those games, but not in designing them.
Yeah.
So as far as like the process goes, right, there's this idea generation, and thankfully have a fairly, my boss kind of believes in me and my ideas enough. And one of the things that we do, which I think more companies need to do, big and small, even if you're a solo designer, is to learn like the bare minimum about Facebook ads and do market testing before you even start design and development. So what I do before I commit to a project, and I do some market research. So I get some stock art and I put it on a box template. So it's this nice 3D rendered box.
Yep.
With some stock art, and I throw a name on the top, and then I advertise with that name, and I see if I can generate leads with a couple $100. And I've done it long enough where I know what is a good kind of generation. If people are clicking on it, then great. If people aren't clicking on it, then I was like, okay, this idea, I might like it, but it seems like people don't like it, shelf it. And then I don't, commit. So there's real early proof of market practice, which I think is great, because a lot of people have good ideas, but they don't penetrate the market, because there's just a lot of stuff going on. So it's like, hey, does your idea actually resonate? Do people want what you are selling, want what you're making? And I know, so we did that. So I ran the first Mythwind ads. What month are we in right now? We're in October, a year and a half ago.
Wow.
The first Mythwind ads came on Facebook a year and a half ago, and it was only a couple $100. But it was enough of a, hey, people are clicking at this at an enormously great rate. And so that kind of fueled the development cycle for it.
So I just want to pull that thread just really quickly,
keep on going, please,
right? Because this is fascinating, right? This is the first I've actually had anybody on the podcast actually talk about this. So when you're doing these, it's like a concept study is essentially what you're doing, right? Yeah. You're talking marketing terms. Now, is it the theme you're testing, or because when you have a Facebook ad, you can't really get too heavy into what the game is really about, right?
So I think a question that any designer needs to be able to answer is, can you distill, like it's your elevator pitch, but it's not even an elevator pitch, it's a one sentence. So like for Akarios, and you can be shameless. Akarios were like Gloomhaven meets X-Wing. Like everyone who's a board gamer knows, oh, okay, so it's a big campaign game, but instead of having fantasy creatures, I have a individual ship and it's more dogfighty. Mm-hmm. Cool. Right, so everyone can latch on to that. And with Mythwind, so that's honestly my first ad. advertisements for Akarios were that Gloomhaven meets X-Wing. And then maybe I had another line. With Mythwind, the idea came from playing Stardew Valley with my wife, and video game, and it's a real chill cooperative experience. There's no like goals or end. It's like open-ended, and it's this like this experience where there's like you plant. It's Harvest Moon. I don't know, all these types of games if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
Animal Crossing. And so I'm like, the advertisements, do you like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing? This is the board game for you. That's it. So it's like, it's that concept, and it's being able to be like, hey, you know what is the ethos? Like, what is the feeling that the game is going to elicit? How can I provide a reference point for that feeling so that people can latch on to it? And then hopefully that kind of rolls from there.
And then, so I'm sharing the screen so people can see this. I mean, just right off the hop, I'm not even going to skip past the very top header here, where you're over 890,000 in funding, more than 7,700 backers, still 17 days to go. I mean, I don't want to curse it, but like, I'm sure you guys are thinking the Milski, right? We're thinking this thing's going to cross $1 million, you think, or what?
Yeah, I think so, especially with the typically the last kind of 48, 72 hour bump.
Yeah. With that hockey stick. So can you walk us through this game? So you describe it as this kind of asymmetrical co-op board game where you live the life of an adventurer or pioneer in a whimsical fantasy persistent world. Expand that out for us. What does that mean?
Yeah, so basically Mythwind is a game where each player takes on a unique character. You might be the farmer, a merchant, woodsman, crafter. And each character plays very differently. They have their own mechanics, their own set of things, but all characters contribute to the town together. So you're invited into this kind of magical valley, Mythwind Valley, by these creatures called sprites, and they invite you to kind of help build this town in their valley. And so you go about doing that. Each character kind of does that in a little bit different way, but you go about expanding your town's population and your buildings. So you get this kind of tableau builder. And we have this, there's this narrative element that kind of goes through everything. And we've been working hand in glove with Game Trays to actually create different trays that are more than just like, hey, put everything in this tray and then go from here. No, the tray is actually like your play space for each character. And so that when you finish the game, you can actually just close a lid and put it in a box and leave. So my goal is like set up and tear down in under 2 minutes. Every kind of main component is ready to go there, because when I initially pitched this idea to my boss, he's like, oh, it's kind of like the bonsai tree of board games, right? So it's like, bonsai trees, you take out, you tend it, and then you put it back, and then the next day you take it out, you tend it, you put it back. I envision people playing Mythwind in a similar way. Some people might have it kind of laid out on their table for a while, and they're just playing a couple turns every day,
almost like a puzzle that you have sitting out on your table.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, treating it a little bit like a puzzle where they're like, progressing the story, progressing their characters. Other people might kind of play it by themselves to start, and then pack it up, take it over to a friend, and continue the story, because the characters and the town are actually acting independently of one another. So you can kind of hot swap. You don't have to play with the same 4 people every session. The town's progressing independently of the characters themselves. So that's, it's an experience I haven't seen in board games before. I think it's really neat.
This whole idea of it not really having any winning conditions. Can you explain that? That might be foreign. That might be foreign for some people, right?
It's foreign for everyone in the board game world. So I was getting this question a lot leading up to the campaign.
Yeah.
And I posted a kind of like, I don't know, a massive post on Board Game Geek about why isn't there an ending or win condition to Mythwind? And then I addressed 3 questions, right? Why doesn't the game end? How do I win Mythwind? Is my playing of Mythwind aimless? The kind of three questions to hopefully satisfy. And then the idea, at the heart of it is there are goals and objectives for players to work towards. There's content to unlock. There's characters to be leveled up. But if you're playing the game to, typical cooperative games are players versus the board, right? Pandemic, there's a pandemic and players are trying to squash the pandemic so that the world is saved. At the end of the game, you either won by, eradicating the pandemic, or you lost by the whole population of the world dying. In Mythwind, instead of playing against the board, you're actually like playing with the board. So there's not like this massive challenge to overcome where you either win or you lose. So even if you fail a goal, yeah, you might be pushed back a few steps, but you can kind of keep on progressing and going for it. And there's this thing, if you're a player that needs to beat your friends in a game, you're not gonna like Mythwind. Like you're just not gonna like it. It's a cooperative experience, where it really relishes the journey and like kind of like minor destinations along the way. But there's no like one set, hey, reach here and you won. There are different moments where you're like, hey, yeah, I've unlocked this new thing. Cool. I've checked off this achievement box. Cool. But there's no like, I'm finished. Cool. It's just a different experience.
You must eventually run out of story elements, though, or do they just keep recycling back into the?
Yeah, so some of them recycle a little bit, some standard ones. But as far as like the main kind of trunk of the story, it eventually runs out. Just like any open-ended game, there is a point where you're like, there's no new story to continue. And at that time, players either continue playing and they just are happy to go through the motions and continue using your character, or you can easily just kind of reset and start again from a different route.
And then how you play also creates certain streams of story as well, right? Like your story is actually different depending on how you play the game. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. So there's this kind of emergent narrative deck, event deck that happens in the game. And so as players are playing, different events get drawn. And then the deck feeds itself based off of how the players have built up their town. So, a real minor one, there's 4 town resources. There's income, production, culture, and food. And so one of the first kind of event cards that pops up says, if your culture is higher than your production, then shuffle in these 2 cards into your deck. If your production is higher than your culture, then shuffle in these 2 cards in the deck. And basically what that is going to reflect are the choices that you've made in your town to build certain buildings that increase your culture production. And then the story is going to unfold differently because of how you've interacted with your town. Instead of it being like do you want to do this or do you want to do this? It's less like a choice given to you in that moment, as opposed to a choice that's reflective of the choices you've already made.
Can you talk a little bit about the artwork? I'm showing it on the screen here, and I mean, it's awesome, right? It's awesome. There's no other way to explain it. The minis are amazing. They're pre-painted, are they, these minis?
No, they're not. There's a big asterisk saying that they come unpainted.
Let me look for that asterisk, but I mean, even painted, they look phenomenal, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that love painting these.
They're fantastic. So our artist, lead artist is this guy named Dan Wing, and then we have a co-artist, Amanda. I always mispronounce her last name, Amanda Kadatz. Both of them really, really talented. Dan has you actually won't be able to find much of his information online, but he has a long resume of DreamWorks and Pixar, Disney, and he's worked on a lot of fun projects. Everyone will have seen something of Dan's probably, without them necessarily knowing it. So
it's super high quality. And did you guys have like an idea of the style and look, like when you were doing your testing, right, online, where you threw kind of a box together and some mock artwork? Was it along in this vein at all, or was it a completely different style and they took it in a different direction?
Yeah, completely different style. And actually, I had hired a different artist that did a project. So you can actually, it was pretty cool. I'm trying to like look for it. But anyways, I hired a different artist, and it wasn't capturing the vibe of what I wanted. So actually, if you Google Mythwind Valley, you can actually see our initial, well, no, you can't, but there's an initial piece floating around which didn't capture the vibe we wanted, so shifted.
And if people want to play this, they can check it out on Tabletop Simulator as well, right? If they want to do like a pre-play, I guess.
Yep. Our Kickstarter prototype is up there, unfinished. There's a handful of like known errors. You can read the FAQ below it.
That's awesome. So, when you have a campaign like this that is doing the kind of numbers that you're doing, and I've been following this a little bit before you guys launched. You hit I think you had like 15,000 pre-signups in your kind of pre-notification page, which is just massive, right?
Yeah.
How do you get there? Obviously, you've got the history of some other large titles you guys have built, which you can build off the backs of those. But is there any nuggets you can kind of throw out there for other developers or designers looking to do their game of things that you guys know that you did really well?
Yeah. So like, I can't overemphasize that initial like market research enough. Too many people create too many cool things that people don't care about. And so that's like, it's really tough. I see all these, I see a lot of neat projects that go online that are cool. And I know people have invested hundreds of hours. And I guess that's, there's two different ways of thinking about it, because there is the way of like, what, I'm just going to design this, right? And I love this idea, I love this concept. I'm going to kind of design it for me. And that's cool. And there's something like really neat there.
Yeah.
But, for us, when we, invest a couple 100,000, because that's kind of what our development budget ends up being, right? With our team, it's like, hey, are people hungry for this type of project? So that's the thing. And there's different levels of scale, but I actually think any scale, even if it's just like a solo developer, can do that if they're interested in Kickstarter route, and like, hey, are people gonna like be interested in my game? And then ultimately it's kind of like three things. The first thing is like the getting people in, which is Facebook ads. The second thing is making sure that they have a place to go to, which should be Facebook groups, Board Game Geek page. And then lastly, it's making sure that you're engaged where people are. And so it's in a sense, it's a funnel. Where we try to get as many people into our groups as possible, and that's Discord, Facebook group. Those are kind of our two main things. And then I'm very active, and Nathan and I we're very active in those groups, kind of leading up to launch, and getting people excited, because you want your kind of like evangelist there on day one to click back now, so that it spreads. So it's a little bit of like, you need money to invest. You don't need a lot of money.
Yeah.
And we actually, I didn't cross promote this with Akarios until a month ago. It was very intentional, and we have a very small overlap with the Stars of Akarios audience, which is just like kind of a bummer in some ways, but it's a completely different game. Plus that game hasn't delivered yet, so I understand people are like, you know what, I'm gonna wait till Akarios gets delivered before jumping in on this one.
Yeah, it's very completely different genres, right?
Totally.
Different games, different genres. So and I think it's a good point. I was talking to somebody the other day about this, where they said, you need a lot of money to launch a game of your own, right? As a designer I was talking to.
Yeah.
And, the conversation quickly went to, well, yes, if you want to hit some of the big numbers, right? There's the more you invest up front, the bigger you're going to have that initial audience. If you want to have a higher profit margin, the more of your own funds you put in up front, the higher profit margin you're going to have versus, simple one would be doing social media amplification, right? There's services you can use where providers, they will fund it and they will take it out of the funds when the campaign finishes. They're going to take a much higher percentage than someone that says, no, we'll manage it for you, but it's coming off your credit card, right? That's going to be a lower margin. So there's different ways you can try to kind of play with those ratios, but ultimately you still should be able to launch a game on Kickstarter if you're a budding designer out there looking to do your first project for very, very little money, right? That's the whole point of crowdfunding, is you've got a platform where you can go and get pre-orders before you go and spend a boatload of money. And there's tons and tons of tools. We've covered a lot of them off on this podcast as well, of ways that you can shorthand your costs on putting together a game, right? Something that's commercially viable. GameCrafter is a perfect example of that as a way to create prototypes. You could do fulfillment, even quite frankly, through GameCrafter if you have a very small number of backers. So you're not going to make as much money, but if your goal is to just get a game out there and kind of get your feet wet, that's definitely a viable option to go. I know in the past you've used some social media amplification companies. What are you guys doing now? Are you doing mainly internally now, managing your Facebook ads? Did you guys still use third-party providers?
Yeah, so we partnered up with BackerKit for our pre-launch and our launch. Yeah,
nice.
and it's going okay. The pre-launches went well. During launch now, it's fine. Pre-launch was good. But so that's who we're using right now.
And is there any other types of marketing that you guys? So you mentioned Discord. For people out there that maybe don't even have Discord on their radar, how important is it, would you say, to people that Discord and to kind of get into that ecosystem? Yeah,
so I saw this chart the other day. It's called the 99-1 rule. So 90% of people are onlookers, 9% are commenters, 1% are creators. So if you're listening to this, you're probably in the 1% of creators. The 9%, those are the people that you need to convince. Because those are the vocal ones. Those are the vocal in a positive way, vocal in the negative way. Those are the ones commenting, rating on BGG, on Discord, and all these things. And so you have to find out where they are. And for board game people, it's Discord, Board Game Geek, and Facebook groups. Those are the three places where, and Instagram. But it's harder to foster community on Instagram. And so those you have to go to where they are, and you have to make sure that those 9% like you, right, and trust you. And especially if like you're a first timer, it's like, hey, why am I shelling out $50 to $100 on a project of yours? Make me believe you. And so being open and transparent and free with information, I think, is really key.
Now this game is over $100 Canadian.
Yeah, it's expensive
for your base game, right? And so did you guys market test that as well? Clearly, obviously, it's not an issue because you've got some giant numbers and a lot of backers. But going into this, that's always a risk, right? Did you guys market test that as well?
No, it was market research. We're looking around at other companies and what they provide and what they don't provide. And the reality is I actually think the hardest part about being an independent, and I wouldn't say we're an independent board game manufacturer anymore, but like if you're a solo person, hardest part now is your margins are so thin, especially with shipping. It's bonkers. I would have, like, with Last One Standing, raising 28,000, we did a print run of 1,000, sold 500 on Kickstarter. I would have lost so much money if that was today on it, where it turned out I broke even on that. But I was sure, like, with container costs, being 5 times as much as they were, 5 years ago or whatever, that's insanity.
Yeah, it's great. I just went through this on a earlier podcast that we had done about a month ago. I was talking about how our last campaign, which is a much smaller campaign than this one, mind you, but our shipping costs, container costs, doubled, right? Over and above even what we had like a couple months ago. We ended up eating that. We didn't want to go back to the well and ask for more money. But it is crazy how fast things can change. I had this last week. We were ready to ship the one container to the UK, and our freight forwarder's like, sorry, the channel dried up that we were sending that on. Now it's like, for that particular container, it's like another $1,000, right? So you really got to make sure you're protecting yourself. I've seen some people say, you know what, we're going to do our pledge manager closer to when we're actually fulfilling, so we can get more accurate on the shipping up or down, right? So we don't want to just pick it based on today's rates, because it might be 1/5 of that next year when we're actually fulfilling. And likewise, we don't want to put ourselves that we're in a risky situation where they go up. So, it's always kind of that gentle dance. So you've got a lot of projects, obviously, you guys work on. You work on these big meaty projects. What's kind of next coming for you? What's next on the horizon?
Yeah, so focus is right now, well, Stars of Akarios, it's in mass production fulfillment. So it's interesting. My hands are kind of off of that. Really, really excited for people to get the game and interact when that happens. Mythwind is high, kind of number one on the priority right now. And then we have a game in the pipeline. maybe will come out next year. It's being designed by an ex Fantasy Flight guy.
Nice.
One of the guys who worked on X-Wing third edition for a while. So he's in design. I actually just got a text message from him right now. So you can actually if you search up Max Brook, MAXBROOKE.com, the Babblings of Brook. You can check out his recent blogs.
Oh, that's cool.
He's blogging about the game that he's making. We haven't named it or really announced it or any of that stuff yet. So you heard it here first.
Breaking news. And if people want to follow along and be part of kind of your, community that can follow along these projects as you're kind of, slowly leaking them out, approaching a launch, how best do they do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We make different communities for each of our projects. And so you can follow along with the projects, right? Mythwind or Stars of Akarios, or
OOMMgames.com. Do you have like a general list there?
Yeah, OOMM Games. We have a Facebook channel, but we really try to build up communities around our projects. And so that's kind of like our thing, because Akarios is so different than Mythwind, which will be so different than the next game.
Yeah.
And so I love that there's a different group of people with each of those things.
No, that's cool. Brendan, I can't wait to see where you guys land on this game. I think it's going to be shocking. I think the numbers you guys end up doing this. It is such a cool concept. Hearing people talk about it, there's this kind of almost bewilderment, but excitement and, excitement around it that I think this is something that people are going to be talking about for quite some time. So I want to wish you all the best on this campaign. And
hey, thanks so much.
We'll get you back on the podcast for the next one. You take care.
Cool.
Cheers.
Hey.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.